to give this description of Dr. Timothy in 30 seconds, which is really hard work because he's got a lot on his list. Most of us know him, but in case you don't know his illustrious history, I'll give you a quick review. He has a PhD from Dartmouth, a BA from University of Denver. He was a faculty member at Texas Christian, at the University of Arizona, Eastern Oregon University, Franklin and Marshall College. Where's Franklin and Marshall College?
Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
He likes to go back and forth across the country.
It's in the heart of the Amish country. It's actually quite
But he's got lots and lots of publications in scientific reviews, journals, lots and lots of articles. He's a specialist on the working of the brain and its perception of internal and external signals and music perception, spatial representation, imagery, psychophysics, and consciousness. I think that covers almost everything.
It's still interesting stuff.
But it's very interesting stuff. He's got associate editor and consulting editor positions at peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals. One's called Auditory Perception and Cognition and Frontiers in Psychology, so we're looking at a pioneer. Attention, Perception, Psychophysics, and Journal of Experimental Psychology, Human Perception and Performance. That gives you an idea of what he's interested in. A lot of stuff. He's recently named co-editor of a new book series. Is this a series of books or chapters or small books?
A series of books.
College books or?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Current Issues in Perception, to be published by Routledge Press. He's a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, and a fellow of the Psychonomic Society, and a Sequoia Fellow of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. So he comes well equipped.
No kidding.
I have a question. You mentioned psychophysics twice. Does that mean he's a mad scientist?
Yeah.
That's a separate issue.
But he is a mad scientist, but he's good at what he does. And we've had a lot of his insights in the past, but this was a kind of a new spin on things, and we thought it'd be kind of fun. And we knew on a cold night we'd all come out to see Timothy. So welcome everybody, and let's enjoy Timothy's exciting frontiers.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. I'm going to talk about hypnosis tonight, and hypnosis has had an image problem. It's been associated with the occult, with sideshow and stage magicians and charlatans, and it's long been misportrayed in books and films. You might often see subjects brought on stage, hypnotized, and made to perform all kinds of strange acts if they're given the proper cue. So, for example, cluck like a chicken when you hear the word grape. In an even more extreme example, someone might be hypnotized, given a post-hypnotic suggestion to commit a crime or maybe even assassinate someone. Because of these kind of unsavory associations, many mainstream scientists have been hesitant to examine or consider hypnosis. It's like the H word. So despite hypnosis having been around for quite some time, there's surprisingly little that we actually know about it. I should mention at the outset that I'm not a professional hypnotist, nor am I a licensed hypnotherapist. I have, though, hypnotized people before in research settings, and as a college professor, I am used to groups of people appearing to fall asleep as I talk to them. As a postdoctoral fellow many years ago, I did participate in running a few scientific studies on hypnosis. Here's the agenda for tonight. It might be a bit ambitious, but we'll get through as much as time allows. We'll start with some brief history, then we'll look at the two main contemporary scientific views about hypnosis and the definition of hypnosis. Then we'll look at the idea of suggestion, how that relates to hypnosis, some of the most common ways of assessing hypnotic susceptibility. We'll briefly look at post-hypnotic amnesia and post-hypnotic suggestion. We'll note some of the more commonly reported elements of the subjective experience of hypnosis. What's it like to be hypnotized? And then we'll look at some cognitive and some physiological correlates of hypnosis. We'll then note a range of clinical and medical issues that have been treated with hypnosis. And then we'll look at common experimental methods in the scientific study of hypnosis. So if you think hypnosis might be working, how are you actually going to study it and evaluate it in the laboratory? And we'll look at some ideas of neodissociation theory, one of the main theories of hypnosis, and the idea of the hidden observer and what that might tell us about the way the mind works. Finally, we'll consider whether hypnosis can be used to enhance memory, either in the form of an age regression or what's sometimes called a hypermnesia. Now, modern approaches to hypnosis trace back to Franz Anton Mesmer, who practiced what we would today call hypnotism, but back then in Paris in the 1770s, he called it animal magnetism. He treated women that were diagnosed with hysteria, which back then was a pretty broad category covering everything. He thought his effect over subjects or patients was due to the transmission of some kind of magnetic force between him and the patient. And in fact, even today when someone is entranced or totally absorbed by something, we say they're mesmerized. That's where the name comes from, Mesmer. Mesmer and the idea of animal magnetism was discredited by a French commission in 1784. It was headed, interesting enough, by the American scientist, inventor, and ambassador Benjamin Franklin. Nonetheless, mesmerism did seem to benefit some patients. So it was rehabilitated and rebranded as hypnosis by English physician James Braid in the mid-1800s. He called it hypnosis, which comes from the Greek word hypnos, which means sleep. And if you look at somebody that's been hypnotized, it kind of looks like they're asleep. So that's where he got that name. Now after that, in the later 1800s, there was a major debate, which actually continues to an extent today, over whether hypnotism was a purely neurophysiological phenomenon, was it purely psychological, was it kind of a mix of the two. And one more influential neurologist at the time, Jean-Martin Charcot, claimed hypnosis could vary in degree, but it was purely neurophysiological. Charcot had a very wide influence, including on a young student who thought maybe psychology was important. That young student, by the way, was Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud in 1880s, again, he used hypnosis in treating his patients, who, of course, had hysteria, because that's what everybody had back then, and neurosis, again, because that's what the other people had back then, before developing his own psychoanalytic system. So from about 1900 until now, hypnosis has kind of gradually gained in some respectability despite the sideshow carnival barkers. And today, both the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association have recognized clinical hypnosis and hypnotherapy as a valid type of treatment. Now, there's little doubt that it can help some clinical and medical conditions, but exactly what it is and how it works is still a source of continuing debate. Now, within the scientific literature, there are two main views of hypnosis. Okay, the first is trance theory. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as special process theory or as state theories, because they suggest hypnosis is a special state. Okay, it's a trance state or an altered state of consciousness that's different from your normal waking state. And this altered state is often thought to involve some kind of dissociation or splitting of the levels of consciousness. So, for example, on one level, a person may report feeling pain, but on another level, they may report not feeling any pain. And it's only in the trance or the hypnotic state that they can perform feats such as this. Now, in a little while, I'll come back and challenge that statement, but for now, we'll go with it. Other theorists deny that a separate trance state exists. These theorists assert that a person who is allegedly hypnotized is just playing along, fulfilling the role of a hypnotized subject. Now, these theories stress the social nature of hypnotism, or the sociological nature. And they're considered non-state theories because they suggest hypnosis is not a special state. Now, their data supporting this position comes from studies that have failed to find any kind of physiological differences between a normal waking consciousness and the so-called hypnotic trance state. As you might guess, given the differences between these two different approaches, there isn't a generally agreed upon definition of hypnosis. I came across an approximation in one of the textbooks that I used when I used to teach a class on consciousness studies at TCU, and I think this will give us a good starting point. Hypnosis is a psychological state or condition induced by a ritualistic procedure in which the subject experiences changes in perception, thinking, and memory, and behavior in response to suggestions by a hypnotist. There's a lot in that definition. We need to unpack some of it. A psychological state or condition That means hypnosis seems subjectively different from normal waking consciousness. This doesn't necessarily imply that it's a separate or special kind of process, just that it's a little different. Induced by a ritualistic procedure refers to the fact that hypnosis is usually induced through some specific induction procedure. These are not the droids you're looking for. I thought that would get more, but anyway, hypnosis doesn't happen spontaneously is the idea. It has to be explicitly induced. Now, there are a variety of ways in which hypnotic induction can occur, and we'll look at some of those in a few minutes. Subject experiences changes indicates that a critical aspect of hypnosis is the subject's conscious experience. Okay. So in perception, thinking, memory, and behavior, well, that pretty much covers all bases, but it refers to experiences such as hallucinations or amnesia that might be typical of hypnotic experience, but hopefully are not typical of the person's normal waking consciousness. Finally, in response to suggestions by the hypnotist, emphasizes that hypnotic responses are due to relevant suggestions from the hypnotist. So although self-hypnosis can occur, it's still controversial just how similar self-induced states are to other induced states. For example, in self-hypnosis, a person doesn't surrender his or her control to another person, whereas if someone else is hypnotizing you, you do surrender control to another person. Now, in this definition, I mentioned the term suggestion a couple of times. What does that mean? A suggestion is a communication, and it can be verbal or nonverbal, from the suggestor, the hypnotist, to the suggestee, which would be the subject. And a suggestion is aimed at bringing about some experience or behavior that's otherwise different from what the suggestee would experience. Okay. Basically, if I provide you with information that makes you respond differently than you would have otherwise, that's a suggestion. A suggestion is not a command, it's not an instruction. A command or instruction tells the subject exactly what to do. A suggestion is a little more subtle, more indirect. It doesn't force a response, but it implies a response. I realize that's a subtle distinction. So I'm going to give you the classic example of this that's always given. Yes, you do have to participate in this part. Hold out your hands in front of you. Palms maybe 6 inches or so apart. Okay. Now, close your eyes. Imagine that there's a force between your hands, a force like a magnet. And the force is pulling your hands together. The force is getting stronger. It's pulling harder and harder on your hands. Feel that force. Okay. Now open your eyes and look at your hands. Are they closer together than they were when you closed your eyes?
Oh, I forgot to look in the first place. Yes.
I left out that subtlety.
Trust me, it is.
Notice, though, I didn't tell you to move your hands. It was just sort of implied by my suggestion that there was a force pulling your hands together. So if you're able to vividly imagine a force pulling your hands together, then you'll experience your hands moving together. Now, in the classic suggestion effect, this experience is involuntary. It doesn't require any conscious volition. It seems to happen in and of itself. There's another version of this, that, since that one works so well, we'll try out. But this time, put your arms all the way out front. Okay. Palms up. In your right hand, you're holding the string of the balloon. Oh, close your eyes. Your right hand is holding a balloon filled with helium. And the balloon is trying to rise up. And you know that if you let go of it, it's going to go up to the ceiling. In your left hand, you're holding a brick. And it's a pretty heavy brick. Your arm is kind of starting to feel the tension. It might even be trembling a little bit because you're trying to hold up this brick and you wish you could put it down. Okay. Open your eyes. You know, some of you have your hands slightly different. Many of you don't, but maybe I should just start with the first demonstration. If your hand holding the balloon had been a little bit higher than the hand holding the brick, that would have been the response to the suggestion. Again, I didn't tell you to move your hands, but I gave you information that might have induced that experience. Now, I need to make a distinction between two different kinds of responses, and this is something that's probably already occurred to some of you. One type is an objective response. This is your overt, your outward behavior. This is what anybody watching you would have seen. The second kind of response is your subjective response. It's kind of what you felt on the inside. Somebody's looking at you, might not have realized that that's what you were subjectively experiencing. Now, although most people who usually have one type of response also have the other type of response, it is possible to have both types, one but not the other, or neither. In the demos that we just did, for example, a person who was faking it might have lowered his left hand, even though he didn't experience any of the implied weight of the brick. In that case, it would have been an objective response, but not a subjective response. Not everybody here exhibited the same amount of like hands moving together or arm changing. And as you might expect, there are varying degrees of hypnotic susceptibility. And one of the areas of research has tried to develop scales for quantifying the degree of hypnotic susceptibility. And there are two main measures that we're going to consider tonight.